So we've looked at apologies and what apologies would be like in a world without free will. Let's now think about uh, personal relationships more generally. So apologies are going to be an important part of personal relationships, but there's more to them than that. So how would personal relationships be affected? Now, some people argue that personal relationships actually require strong emotional reactions. So see in the next lecture, this is the view that seems to be implied by Peter Strawson. We have to be able to respond to people in these angry and intense ways to really have valuable personal relationships. And many contemporary philosophers have echoed this view. The idea being that, if things are to really matter, if it's going to really matter that we're in a relationship, there's got to be things that at stake, right? And the fact that you get really angry when somebody sort of betrays you or upsets you shows how important the relationship was. And if feelings like anger and indignation and resentment are inappropriate, then we're going to lose a lot out of our personal relationships. So free will skeptics like Per Boom, well, they are quite on board with losing those strong reactions. They think that, in fact, maybe those are going to be counterproductive to meaningful personal relationships. But they say that, look, we can't get like anger and resentment and gratitude, but we can still get sort of weaker versions of those things. We can still have moral sadness or disappointment. We can still say, I'm not angry with you, I'm disappointed. That kind of thing. We can still be upset. That's not going to be taken away, because that kind of attitude, that kind of emotion, according to skeptics, doesn't presuppose that we have free will. We can have this kind of emotion without free will. So as with apology, we're kind of sort of weakening, or if you want to be a bit more suggestive, watering down our emotional involvement in a world without free will. We just can't justify it. But there's something to really think about here. It's like, perhaps this is something the skeptic could appeal to strengthen their position, is to say, well, maybe it's not that much weaker. Like, maybe the skeptic can say, like, disappointment often hurts more than anger. Sometimes when we upset people, they get angry. We're like, well, the person got angry. Ugh, they got angry. What can I do? If the same person had gotten disappointed or had been disappointed in us, that can hurt. That can cut through a lot more. And I think it's true that sometimes this happens in very intimate personal relationships. If a partner or a friend can't even get angry with you and is disappointed, that can be, oof, it can be worse than the anger. The anger at least can be sort of dealt with, expected. But the disappointment, that can be harsh. So maybe skeptics should really sort of draw more on this idea that these allegedly weaker emotions are actually sometimes stronger. Like, they hurt more. So the skeptics can sort of salvage something about personal relationships. And I think they have the resources to sort of say that, okay, we can't have certain emotions, but we can have these other emotions, sometimes more intense emotions. But what about love? Can't we still have love in a world without free will? Well, it seems that many forms of love could survive, because many of them seem involuntary. Think of the love a parent has for a child. So I recently have my daughter was recently born, and I don't think I have any choice about loving her. I just love her more than anything else, and that's just something I have no control over. And moreover, I wouldn't want control over that. It's the same with my wife. I love her more than anything else as well. I cherish and value her, and I don't see myself as having control over that. And so I don't want to have control over that. But some people think that, if you're sort of compelled, or like you have no control over loving your romantic partners, then you're going to lose some sort of value there, right? And one thing they might say is, like, well, to argue for this, like, suppose your partner was brainwashed into loving in you. So think back to the manipulation cases, the brainwashing cases from the lectures on compatibilism. Suppose we have these nefarious neuroscientists working in the background, and like they got your boyfriend or girlfriend, and they like fiddle with their brain, implanted certain desires and certain beliefs. And then it was because of that that person came to love you, came to meet you, came to fall in love with you. Suppose you found out that. Would that make you think any differently about them? Would that affect it? And I think many people would be affected by that. Many people would think that's not so good. Like, oh, it's not so. There's something kind of upsetting about the idea that somebody would be brainwashed, somebody would be manipulated into liking us. Hold the thought about manipulation for a moment. Like, let's consider what Parabim says. So Parabim thinks that like we can still make decisions. We're still deliberators. We can still decide what we do, and if we don't have free will, and that's really what we want our loved ones to do. We want them to be the ones who make those decisions, even if they're not freely made decisions, they're not agent causes, they're not ultimate originators. They still go through decisions, like to spend time with us, for example. Like they may not have control over initially loving us, but they may have control over continuing to spend time with us, because just because you love someone doesn't mean you actually have to be with them. You could think that they're a toxic person and you're not going to spend time with them, and that it would be bad for you overall to continue to do it. So there are some decisions that go into like our love lives. But Parabim also points out, in an attempt to sort of support the idea that we can still have love and without free will, is that even if decisions are involved in people falling in love with us or being with us, we don't want the kind of initial thing, the initial falling in love, to be within their control. He thinks, like I do, that it would be kind of bizarre if you had a choice about falling in love with your child or your wife or your romantic partner more generally. He thinks that would be weird. And I agree. I think there'd be something strange. Like it seems like when it comes to romantic love, we kind of want people to be drawn to us and we want to be drawn to people. We don't want it to be the case that we go, what about this person? Give that a try. I mean, you might first, before you fall in love with somebody, say, well, let's spend time with this person. Let's see how that goes. But the actual falling in love part, you want that to be a bit more involuntary. So Berman thinks, like, look, there are decisions in long-term relationships. They don't need to be free ones. And we don't need them to be free ones. And the falling in love parts, we don't want that to be free, because that would be bizarre. I think back to our worries about manipulation. So you might think, well, if we don't have free will, that doesn't mean we're brainwashed. But remember the kind of point that Perboom and other incompatibilists make, right? Other free will skeptics more generally. They think that certain forms of manipulation are not relevantly different to being causally determined. They think that, if you become the puppet of another person, that's sometimes no different to being causally determined. One of the main premises of the manipulation argument is that there's no morally relevant difference between certain forms of manipulation and being causally determined. So this means that if you thought there was something problematic about your romantic partner loving you because they were brainwashed, shouldn't you also think that there's something problematic about your partner being causally determined? I mean, that's assuming those things are not relevantly different. And if they're not relevantly different, then a problem for one should be a problem for another. And so, for the sake of argument, for the moment, let's just accept there's not any relevant differences, as skeptics and hard incompatibilists like Perboom think. If it turned out that, the person who loves you in a way that's not dissimilar or not relevantly different from a person who's brainwashed to love another person, would that affect the value of your relationships? So I'm going to stop the lecture there today. We're going to take up the issue of living without free will in the second collaborative class. And one of the things we're going to talk about there is free will and love. And so we're going to have a lot more questions, a lot more examples. We're going to get into a bit more of the nitty gritty. We're going to get you to do some hands-on philosophizing on the issues